Hello, and welcome to the midweek edition of I'm Still Playing. And yes, I am in fact still playing the War Within expansion for the World of Warcraft. I hope your week has been going on fairly well so far. So today we're talking we're talking about delves again, which is really become the hot topic of the week within the community. So as you know, Delves got off to a pretty rocky start during the first week of Season 1. Blizzard was swinging the hotfix back left and right wildly, trying to get Delves into some form of actual playability for both solo and group play. And I won't go into all of the reasons why they were broken. I've actually already done so in a previous video, so I'll invite you to take a look at that, and I'll provide a link at the end of this video. But now that Delves have settled down a little bit and scaling seems mostly okay between solo and group play, people are still carrying on at great length about them. Are they specifically for solo and casual players only? Are they too easy for the gear they offer? Can my Shadow Priest frickin' do them? And the answers to those questions are no, and honestly I'm not sure, but I hope to find out. Okay, let's take a look. I think the best thing to do is to first look at what Blizzard itself said about what their intended use was for Delves. And so let's go back and look at the June announcement for Delves officially from Blizzard. These replayable, seasonal, role-agnostic adventure experiences offer a new way to enjoy the leveling and in-game progression alongside traditional dungeons, raids, and PvP, right? So that's kind of important. They intended for this to be able to be available as an alternative or something that you can do alongside dungeons and raids and PvP. Furthermore, and I think this is really important, along with your NPC companion, Delves can be explored solo or with a group of up to 5 with any combination of classes. And since they take 10 to 15 minutes on average to complete, they're ideal for players who want to experience meaningful game progression without significant time commitments. Now, I think we can largely agree that they've missed on that 10 to 15 minute experience. My experience has certainly been that Delves take closer to 30 to 45 minutes to complete, especially if you're trying to solo them. But most importantly, is that Delves were actually never intended to be only for solo players. What they are intended for are players that want to be able to progress meaningfully in the game, but aren't able to commit to activities that require a very large time sink or time commitment. All right, so fine, the Mythic player says. They're intended for audiences that want to be able to progress meaningfully, but don't have a lot of time to commit. But that makes the gear too easy. I mean, why would I participate in a Mythic 7 dungeon when I can get the same gear from a Tier 8 Delve? And that's actually a pretty fair question, right? Why would you? Well, before I address that particular question, I want to sidebar a little bit and talk about difficulty in MMOs. Okay, difficulty in MMOs typically comes actually in two forms. And for the sake of simplicity, we're going to call this Type 1 difficulty and Type 2 difficulty. And just to be clear, I'm only talking about PvE content. PvP has its own whole knowledge base that's necessary in order to succeed at that. Guess you could call that Type 3 difficulty. But we're just going to be talking about PvE difficulty. All right, so what are these forms of difficulty? Well, Type 1 has to do with the actual boss mechanics themselves, all of the fight mechanics and the boss mechanics. So knowing where to move, where to stand, when to interrupt, extremely important, right? When to move around to the back, when to pick up an ad and drill down on an ad, when to swap back to the boss, okay? Learning the actual fight mechanics itself, that has to do with Type 1 difficulty. And make no mistake, Type 1 difficulty can be really hard. Anyone who participated in Mage Tower back in Legion knows that Blizzard is extremely capable of making just Type 1 difficulty super fucking hard, right? So Type 2 difficulty actually comes from group interaction and dependencies and knowledge of your role. Knowing when to tank swap, even knowing what a tank swap is, knowing who to buff and who to debuff, knowing when to swap to ads versus when to stay on the boss. And more importantly, the difficulty comes also from getting all of the people in your group to execute on all of those things well at the same time. Now, there does come a point where the size of a group can overblow the Type 2 or Type 1 difficulty. That's why, like in 25-man raids, it's possible sometimes for some classes to just be carried because the raid is probably tuned to succeed with only 10 or 15 people actually executing on the Type 1 mechanics. That is the case with LFR raids, right? A good third of the raid can just follow along and stay out of the bat and not die, and you can probably succeed on those boss fights. But that's also why 10-man raids are much, much more difficult in generally because every single person in that group has to execute on the Type 1 mechanics as well as their role, their Type 2 difficulty, well in order to succeed in that content. And that takes a lot of time. Those difficulties, that Type 2 difficulty has all of the responsibilities of the type 1 difficulty for the content, but also all of the added stuff that comes along with doing it in a group and relying on your group and helping out with the group. And so in order to participate in that type 2 difficulty, it just straight up takes a lot more time. And that, my friend, is actually who delves are intended for. Delves are intended for those of us who want type 1 difficulty, who want to progress in type 1 difficulty and want to be rewarded for succeeding in type 1 difficulty, but don't have the time commitment to participate in type 2 difficulty. And so let's get back to that question of why would you run a level 7 plus dungeon when you can solo a tier 8 delve? Well, actually you wouldn't, right? As a mythic level player at the top of your class, you just now have a straight up more efficient way to get to tier 7 plus gear. So go knock yourself out. And keep in mind, you're only going to get that heroic track gear one piece per week from the Great Vault. So if you're just doing delves, it's actually probably going to be more efficient to go back to doing mythic 7 dungeons if you want heroic level gear, because you can only get one piece of gear from the delves. But even the champions level gear, right? If you wanted to gear up your character quickly and start running the higher level mythic dungeons, there's no reason why you can't do tier 8 delve solo. Knock yourself out. Enjoy. But once you want content that's harder than that and you want gear level that's higher than that, well, now you're back to doing mythic level dungeons again. You're back to doing the content that you want to do. And actually, now that Mythic is open, that's exactly what you're seeing, right? You're seeing all of the people that were flooding delves who are mythic level players complaining about delves being too easy, moving out of delves and into the mythic dungeons where they're going to be happiest anyway. And so I think you're going to see a lot of the haranguing about delves being too easy greatly subsiding, because all of the mythic dungeon level players, mythic level dungeon players that had to play delves the first week while mythic level dungeons weren't open can now move on into the higher level gear and participate in the higher level keys for mythic dungeons. So I think that pretty much wraps up everything, sort of my perspective on where delves are and who they're for and what the appropriateness is of the level of the rewards that you get. Delves are for people like me mostly. Well, they're for two kinds of classes of players. The low-level delves are for classes of players that just want something to do besides World Quest to continue to play the game, right? There is a whole class of players who like being challenged, who want to do better and want to get better at your class and want to be rewarded for it, but can't commit to type 2 difficulty. And that's who delves are made for, I think. And man, they are filling that sweet spot perfectly, honestly. And yeah, there's some tuning to do and they're going to get better, but I absolutely love that they exist and that Blizzard is finally providing content for players like me. So there may be one more video too that I want to make about delves, because I didn't actually get around to answering the question in this video as to whether or not my Shadow Priest can do these delves or not solo. Because I do think there's a significant sort of difficulty in terms of like which classes are better able to solo delves and not. And in fact, I don't think so. There definitely is, right? Some classes are just straight up having a much easier time soloing delves than other classes are. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about some of the things that they can do to improve that, I think. Perhaps if not in this season, then maybe in the next season. And I want to give you information about which classes you can look forward to either having an easy time of it or which classes you might be a little bit more challenged with. But before I do that, I want to spend some time playing some of those clothy classes that I think are having a more difficult time with it so that I can come to you with some firsthand knowledge of what it's like. In the meantime, you guys have a great time in delves. Enjoy yelling at Brand, and I will see you soon.